It started with quiet tears at her desk, but within months she had everyone afraid to be alone with her. I sat next to her through it all, and watched our workplace unravel from the inside out. Hi everyone, and thanks for stopping by again. It really means something to have folks out there who want to hear this. What I'm about to share has weighed on me for months, and to be honest, I've gone back and forth on whether or not to put it into words. But here I am, ready to lay it out. I've been working in middle management at a white-collar job for a while now, long enough to know the ins and outs of how things run and to see all the layers beneath the surface. Our department's not massive, maybe 25 people altogether, but I directly lead a smaller team of about 10. We're a casual bunch for the most part. Suits and ties aren't our thing. It's the kind of office where people decorate their desks with photos, crack jokes over coffee, and actually enjoy being around one another. After hours, it's not uncommon for people to hit up a bar down the street, catch a local event, or just hang out together like a weird little work family. That's the kind of place it used to be, before everything shifted. It all started roughly 6 months ago when a new hire joined our department. For the sake of privacy, I'll refer to her as Emily. She wasn't part of my team directly, but because we all work in a shared open-plan office, she ended up seated at the desk right next to mine. That proximity would eventually become a strange and unsettling lens through which I saw more than I ever wanted to. Emily, on the surface, was quiet and unassuming. She looked incredibly young, so much so that people would sometimes mistake her for a teenager. She's in her mid-20s, but with her very petite frame and soft-spoken demeanor, she could pass for someone 10 years younger without trying. I remember the first time someone made a joke about needing to check her ID. It felt innocent then, but looking back, there's something eerie about how often that came up. Within her first month, things started to take a turn. At first it was subtle. I noticed her eyes would well up now and then while she stared at her screen. One day she broke down crying softly at her desk. There wasn't a scene or a big disruption, just a quiet sobbing that made nearby coworkers look up with concern. Emily started sending Slack messages to people, asking if they had a minute to talk. Most often, other women in the department would gently pull her aside and offer her comfort, speaking in low tones, patting her back, reminding her she wasn't alone. She shared a number of reasons for her distress, and they all sounded plausible. She'd lost a family member, she was dealing with housing instability, there were some ongoing legal problems in her life. Everyone took her at her word. The vibe in our office has always leaned compassionate, and people truly tried to uplift her during what we believed were tough times. She became someone we all wanted to look out for, a person going through it, trying to survive. What none of us realized back then was that these episodes weren't random or isolated. A pattern slowly emerged, almost like clockwork. Every week or two, Emily would have another emotional breakdown. The reasons varied, but the behavior stayed eerily consistent. She'd tear up quietly, message someone for a chat, get taken aside for support, and then, like nothing ever happened, she'd return to her desk and crack jokes as if her heart hadn't just been breaking minutes before. It was jarring. Management, myself included, encouraged her to take time off when she was clearly overwhelmed. We offered her the chance to go home, reset, and rest. But she always declined. She insisted she could handle it, and more often than not, she bounced back almost too quickly. Looking back, it feels strange how smoothly she could transition from emotional collapse to cheerful coworker, all within the span of an hour. But things didn't stop there. About 3 months after Emily joined our department, things started to shift in a way none of us could have expected. That's when she started obsessing over a guy from a different team. We'll call him Tyler. He worked just a few rows over in an adjacent department. From what I gathered, they barely even spoke. Maybe once or twice in passing, and even that was likely limited to a polite hi or good morning. But to Emily, those fleeting moments meant something else entirely. She began talking about Tyler constantly. To other women mostly. I'd catch bits of the conversation when they floated over to my desk. She'd gush about how ridiculously good-looking he was, how charming his presence felt, how certain she was that they were meant to be. But here's the thing, she didn't even know his full name. Despite that, she started imagining a life where the two of them were together, planning an escape from her situation, as she vaguely put it. It was more than a crush. It was like watching someone build a whole emotional house on a single passing glance. The rest of us noticed. There were some quiet looks exchanged, a few raised eyebrows, but no one said much. We chalked it up to youth, maybe a bit of romantic immaturity, something that would pass. But it didn't. It got weirder. Eventually, Emily persuaded one of her co-workers, another woman who probably just wanted to keep the peace, to pass along her number to Tyler. A risky move for sure, but one that showed how far she was willing to push this fantasy. Tyler, for his part, never responded. No text, no call. Nothing. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Emily took it personally. Deeply. She didn't just feel rejected, she erupted. She started voicing her anger loudly, in places where anyone could hear. She even went as far as messaging one of her team leads at 9 p.m., fuming about how she was being ghosted, and demanding an explanation as if she was owed one by someone who'd barely even spoken to her. Her co-workers, some of whom had previously tried to support her, attempted to gently reason with her. They reminded her that Tyler might be married or simply uninterested, and that no response didn't mean personal offense. But Emily refused to hear any of it. She stayed angry, loud, and insistent that she had been wronged. Then she shifted gears. She announced, loudly enough for people to hear, that she wanted to make herself so attractive that Tyler would regret ignoring her. What followed was uncomfortable. She began mimicking some of the younger women in the department. She'd ask where they shopped, what brands they wore, then go out and buy nearly identical outfits. It wasn't subtle either. She was clearly trying to recreate their looks piece by piece. One particular coworker, a gothic woman I'll call Raven, became her focus. Emily started copying Raven's clothes so precisely that she would show up the next day wearing near replicas of what Raven had worn just 24 hours before. At first, Raven tried to laugh it off, but after a while, the frustration set in. She began intentionally dressing in extreme styles, bold chains, unconventional harnesses, clearly trying to wear things Emily wouldn't dare replicate. It became almost a joke in the department. A few people even started placing bets on whether Emily would show up in some wild accessory next. She never did, but the copying still made everyone uneasy. And then came the night everything spiraled further. A bunch of us had planned casual Friday night drinks after work, like we usually did every couple weeks. It wasn't an exclusive thing, pretty much everyone got invited, and that included Emily. She came, dressed up and seemingly in good spirits. But things went off the rails fast. According to a few people who were there the entire night, she got blackout drunk after only 2 drinks. Not tipsy. Not a little emotional. Full-blown, slurring her words, crying in public drunk. She hijacked the evening. Loud sobbing, ranting about an ex-hookup that none of us had ever heard her mention before. At one point, a coworker's sister who happened to be there took her to the bathroom to calm her down. That's when Emily apparently went off the deep end. For a good 30 minutes, she cried about how hard her life was socially. She went on about how most women hate her because she's small and skinny, and they're all just jealous. She even claimed that women couldn't stand her because their boyfriends wouldn't stop staring at her. It wasn't just a venting session, it was a full-on meltdown mixed with delusion. The worst part? Every time another woman walked into that bathroom, Emily would grab her attention, sometimes literally, and cry to her too. She'd whimper about how unfairly she was treated because of her petite figure, as though it was some kind of curse that made her a target. It reached a point where she was asked to leave the bar. And by 10 p.m. she was kicked out. People who were there still talk about how awkward and surreal that night was. And believe it or not, things only got more unhinged from there. It wasn't long after that disastrous night out that things at work started taking an even darker turn. Emily, still clearly not over Tyler's lack of response, started spreading stories, alarming ones. She began telling people that Tyler, the very man she had once fawned over, was now stalking her. According to her, he would watch her from a distance, follow her around the office floor and, this part chilled me the first time I heard it, make sexually suggestive comments directed at her appearance, especially her small frame. What made all of this even more disturbing was how calculated it seemed. She didn't just say it once or in private. She began regularly messaging female coworkers, whispering about how he had cornered her in a hallway or stared at her body for too long. She followed some women to their lunch breaks, uninvited, just to vent about it. She wouldn't drop it, no matter how gently they tried to change the subject. I overheard some of these conversations and after a while, it felt off, like she was trying to convince people of something that just wasn't adding up. I finally approached her and, in a calm, concerned way, encouraged her to go to HR. I told her that if she truly believed she was being harassed, that was the right place to go. But the moment I said it, her demeanor shifted. She brushed it off instantly, saying it wasn't that serious, that she didn't want to make things worse. But her behavior didn't match her words. She'd be completely normal around Tyler, no signs of fear, no visible anxiety, then as soon as she returned to her desk, she'd start whispering to coworkers again about his supposed actions. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One particular moment is etched into my memory. I saw her walk past Tyler in the hallway. They didn't exchange a word, not even eye contact. A few minutes later, I stepped into our shared office to find her hunched over her desk, her eyes brimming with tears, flanked by two of our co-workers who looked visibly uncomfortable. She was describing, in vivid detail, how he had followed her into a secluded corner and made explicit comments about her body. But I had just witnessed that nothing of the sort had happened. Not a word, not a look. Just two co-workers walking past each other like strangers. And yet, here she was, spinning a story that sounded like it belonged in a courtroom. That was the final straw for me. I went to HR myself. I gave them the exact time and date of that incident, along with others I had either witnessed directly or overheard in conversation. I emphasized that while I didn't want to dismiss any real claims of harassment, I had personally seen moments that didn't match the stories being told, and that made everything feel suspicious. Our workplace is covered in security cameras, so I felt confident they'd be able to check the footage and verify the truth. HR took it seriously. They called Emily in for a meeting. From what I was told, she doubled down on everything, insisting Tyler was stalking her, claiming she feared for her safety, and requesting a formal investigation. That turned out to be a turning point, and not in her favor. HR began pulling footage right away. They also started reaching out to the women Emily had confided in, asking questions and gathering testimonies. Word of the investigation spread quickly. And that's when things snowballed. More and more employees, some from outside our department, started requesting their own meetings with HR. What surfaced was disturbing. Emily's lies hadn't been isolated, they were widespread and often poorly disguised. She had spun stories to different people and many of the details didn't match. A few co-workers even said they felt manipulated, pressured into sympathizing with her or going along with things that made them uncomfortable. HR asked Emily to provide her own timestamps, specific moments when the alleged incidents had occurred. That's when the cracks turned into craters. She suddenly couldn't remember anything, not even approximate days. And in response to the pressure, she began breaking down, crying openly in the office, retreating to the bathroom for long periods, and claiming she was having debilitating migraines. She called out sick on days when HR had scheduled follow-up meetings. Then she claimed her managers were overworking her so much that she didn't have time to talk to HR at all. It became clear to everyone that she was trying to evade the process. And then came the moment that truly sent a chill through the department. Emily wrote a long, condescending email to the HR representative, the same one who was leading her investigation. In it, she accused the rep of being arrogant, cold, and out of touch. But she didn't just send it, she walked her open laptop around the office, showing other employees what she had written. Like it was a victory. Like she had stood up to the system. After that, things spiraled fast. She became more paranoid, clinging harder to those she believed were on her side. 2 more women ended up going to HR, not about the original allegations but because of Emily herself. They said her behavior had become obsessive. She was staring at them for long periods, asking deeply personal questions, and in one case physically copying their clothes and accessories in an uncanny way. And I'll stop here before moving into that deeply unsettling behavior in full detail in the next section. After the situation with HR started closing in around her, Emily's behavior took a turn that felt less like someone under stress and more like someone unraveling in plain sight. Aside from all the accusations, the tension, and the emotional episodes, she started exhibiting patterns that were subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once you noticed. I don't say this lightly, but it felt like she was studying people, specifically certain women in the office. And I don't just mean noticing what someone wore and complimenting them. I mean full-on fixation. One of the most unsettling things I personally witnessed happened multiple times. Emily would swivel in her desk chair, slowly, deliberately, and just sit there staring. Her eyes wide, unblinking, locked onto another woman across the room. Sometimes it would last 5 minutes, sometimes 30. No expression on her face. Not anger. Not envy. Just blank. Like she was absorbing them with her eyes. I sit just a few feet from her, so I saw it firsthand more times than I can count. At first it was strange. Then it became eerie. Eventually it was downright disturbing. A few of the women caught her in the act. You'd see them notice, shift awkwardly in their seats, give a nervous little wave, and Emily would jump, startled, like she hadn't realized she was being seen. Like she didn't even know she was staring in the first place. It didn't stop there. I noticed her following people. Not in a casual, coincidental way. She would leave the office, then silently trail someone to the kitchen, or down the hallway to the break area, or even to the far end of the building near the windows. She'd keep her distance, never saying a word, just watching. Eyes always glistening like she was holding in tears. It felt invasive in a way that's hard to explain unless you were there to see it. And here's where it gets even heavier. As HR kept pushing for answers and trying to schedule more meetings with her, Emily began falling apart visibly. She was told, during her first meeting with HR, that someone had reported her, not the accused but a third party who overheard her claims and felt something wasn't right. And from that moment forward, she made it her personal mission to find out who snitched. She started approaching co-workers individually, cornering them near the printer or in the break room. She had a list, an actual handwritten list, of people she suspected had reported her, and she would press them for their thoughts. "Do you think it was Stephanie? I know it wasn't you, right?" That kind of thing. She'd fish for clues, watching their reactions, playing some mental game of deduction. But then she crossed a terrifying line. One day she told a colleague, casually like she was talking about the weather, that when she found out who the rat was, she was going to start smashing skulls. Her exact words. Not yelled. Not joking. Said flatly and then dropped like a mic. Word got around fast. People were shaken. Several employees reported the threat to HR within hours, and another round of formal complaints was submitted. That's when HR went quiet. No more scheduled meetings. No updates. Just radio silence. I have my theories. Maybe they were pulling in legal, working with the company lawyers, prepping for a termination. But for those of us in the trenches, the silence was unnerving. The energy in the office shifted entirely. It felt like we were waiting for something to explode. One of the more vulnerable women in the department, we'll call her Rachel, had been a quiet target of Emily's attention for a while. Emily followed her almost daily on her lunch breaks, always trailing behind or trying to engage her in conversation. Rachel, who has documented anxiety and PTSD, started slipping out of the building for lunch just to get space. But even then, Emily would track her down, sending her desperate messages asking for girl time or emotional connection. It became suffocating. And then one day, Emily crossed another boundary. Rachel had gone out to the common area trying to be alone. Emily followed her and without warning, slapped her lightly on the backside. She smiled and said something like, "I had to." Rachel froze. She didn't laugh. She didn't respond. She walked straight back inside, locked herself in the women's restroom and had a panic attack. She ended up calling out of work for a day and a half afterward. She was so frightened that she refused to report the incident. Instead, she internalized it, tried to convince herself it hadn't been that bad. But then, 2 days later, Emily showed up to work with a brand new tattoo. A tattoo that was almost identical to one Rachel had. Same design. Same placement. It felt like some twisted form of branding. Like she was claiming her. It was sick. That was when I had another meeting with HR. I told them everything I could, what I'd seen, what I'd heard, and what others were too afraid to say. But because Rachel wasn't willing to come forward, all of it was technically hearsay. HR said they were concerned, that they were just as upset as I was, and told me to hang in there, that it would be over soon. Meanwhile, we were all walking on eggshells. Management started taking subtle protective steps. Vulnerable employees were invited to casual group lunches with higher-ups, meant as a kind of strength in numbers buffer. A few of the women messaged leadership privately, asking for escorts during smoke breaks. Even the men in the office began avoiding one-on-one interactions with Emily. Nobody wanted to be alone with her, not because of attraction but because they were terrified of being accused of something fabricated. That's the point we'd reached. A 100-pound woman had thrown our entire department into chaos. And the damage wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. By this point, I was unraveling right along with the rest of the department. Except unlike Emily, I didn't have the luxury of turning away from it. I had to keep showing up. I had to lead a team. I had to sit 5 feet away from her while pretending to be fine. But I wasn't fine. Not even close. I have a history, something I don't usually bring up, especially not at work. I've lived through emotional and physical abuse before, and this entire situation with Emily felt like someone had ripped open wounds I had spent years trying to heal. The unpredictability, the manipulation, the feeling of being trapped near someone who could flip a switch at any moment, it all brought me back to places I thought I had long since left behind. And the worst part? She sat right next to me. The same desk every day. The same half-smile. The same random humming or desk doodling as if nothing had happened. Even after threatening to smash skulls, she'd show up like it was any other Tuesday. The tension was unbearable. I'm not proud to admit this next part, but I think it matters that I say it out loud. I started drinking. Heavily. I'm not a reckless guy. I've always had control over myself. But I'd get home after work and before I even took my shoes off, I'd pour a glass of liquor, straight. No ice. Then another. And another. Just trying to numb it. Just trying to make the anxiety stop gnawing at me. Just trying to forget the face of the woman who sat beside me every day and made my life feel like I was back in that abusive house I spent my 20s trying to escape. Therapy, which had been going well for a while, turned into weekly sessions about Emily. My progress stalled. I couldn't talk about anything else. My therapist started gently pointing that out, that I was regressing. That I was avoiding the hard work I needed to be doing because this situation had taken over every corner of my brain. My wife noticed too. One night, after a particularly bad week, I came home drunk and didn't even make it to our bedroom. I crashed on the couch in a shame spiral. I didn't want her to see me like that. She didn't deserve to sleep next to someone spiraling that hard. When I finally told her what was going on, that I'd been sleeping on the couch some nights because I felt like she deserved better than this mess of a man, I saw it hit her. She teared up and told me she'd known something was wrong but hadn't realized how far it had gone. She said she'd been scared for me. And honestly, I was scared for myself. But I promised her that night that I'd get it together. That I'd claw my way back, if not for myself, then for her. Because she's been everything to me. Because she stood by me through worse. Because I owed her that much. As for Emily? At that point, no one really knew what she and her relative were up to. They had both grown increasingly isolated in the office, speaking mostly to each other, leaving the rest of us on edge. Rumors were flying that they planned to move to another state, something Emily had casually mentioned before, but nobody could confirm it. Some coworkers were worried that even after she left, she might try to retaliate in some way, file complaints, or stir up more trouble. But the consensus? She had no legal standing. And even though some victims, like Rachel, were still too shaken to pursue legal action, others were quietly gathering documentation. I made it clear that if any of them chose to file a case or speak to a lawyer, I'd back them completely. I even said I'd take this whole story down from the internet if it ever risked undermining their claims. The truth is, Emily brought a storm into our lives that we didn't ask for and couldn't prepare for. And while the storm has mostly passed, the wreckage is still there. Some of us are still rebuilding, still catching our breath. And if you've been through something like this, or are going through it now, please, I'm begging you, get help. Don't try to carry it alone. Just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, the situation took another wild turn. It began when Emily set her sights on someone else in the office. This time it wasn't admiration, it was vengeance. One of the women who had reported her behavior to HR, I'll call her Sarah, had once been one of Emily's favorites. Emily used to compliment her clothes, mimic her style, and try to attach herself to her during lunch or after-work events. But once Sarah started distancing herself, likely after filing her report, Emily didn't take it well. She'd go around the break room, tears in her eyes, asking anyone who would listen, "Why does Sarah hate me?" People tried to comfort her at first, but the emotional pressure started to wear thin. It became clear that Emily wasn't processing rejection, she was spiraling into obsession. Then came the accusation that blew our minds. Emily and her relative, yes, the same one who also worked in our department, started telling people that Sarah's brother had tried to run Emily off the road. Yes, really? They claimed that while Emily was driving home one evening, Sarah's brother, who occasionally picked her up from work, had followed her and attempted to run her off a bridge. Their proof was non-existent, but they insisted Sarah had put him up to it because she was acting suspicious lately. No one believed it. Not even close. But the sheer audacity of the claim left everyone shaken. And then things got messier. A few days later we found out something that truly crossed the line. Emily's relative, who had always defended her blindly, took it upon herself to commit an actual crime. While Sarah was away from her desk, this woman went through Sarah's personal phone, took screenshots of some private text she had exchanged with a friend, where, unsurprisingly, she vented about Emily, and sent them to HR. It doesn't matter what the text said. Maybe they were unkind. Maybe they were harsh. But they were private. And they were stolen. And here's the kicker. In our state, accessing someone's private device without permission is illegal. Flat out. But instead of immediately addressing the theft, HR confronted Sarah about the content of the messages. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, but word spread fast that Sarah left the meeting red-faced and shaking. I can't tell you how angry I was. Emily's side had committed a blatant violation of privacy, and somehow the conversation turned into how Sarah had spoken unprofessionally. To be clear, she was never officially written up. But the damage was already done. The emotional toll, the betrayal by HR, the stress of being targeted, it was enough to push Sarah further into isolation. And Emily? She fed off it. At this point, people were openly avoiding Emily and her relative. Nobody wanted to talk to them, sit near them, or be alone in a room with either of them. And it only made Emily more volatile. That's when the rumors began, this time that Sarah had physically assaulted Emily at work. The story came not from Emily directly but from her relative. Apparently, Emily was too afraid to speak up herself. There was no incident report, no witnesses, no signs of injury. But the gossip was there, floating in the air like poison. Meanwhile, Emily's breakdowns on the work floor intensified. She would sob loudly, claim she feared for her life, say she felt unsafe. But, here's the pattern, it only ever happened when leadership wasn't around. She saved the drama for regular employees, the ones who didn't have the power to challenge her claims without consequence. More disturbing behavior came to light. People began sharing stories, quietly, cautiously, about how Emily would touch them uninvited. Not violently but invasively. She had a habit of poking people, tickling them, even resting her head on someone's shoulder while they were at their desk. It wasn't flirty. It was boundaryless. One woman, who had been slapped on the backside earlier, finally came forward and told me what had been weighing on her for weeks. She said she hadn't reported it sooner because she feared Emily's retaliation. She'd seen how Emily twisted narratives, how she deflected blame, and how HR seemed slow, or reluctant, to take action. She was terrified that Emily would claim she had initiated the contact and turned the whole thing around. The anxiety got so bad that she started showing up to work late, staying silent during meetings and withdrawing from everyone. Then one day, Emily had a full-blown meltdown in the middle of the office. She was gasping, hyperventilating, crying with her whole body. Came out of nowhere. People weren't sure whether to help or run. Eventually, she disappeared into the restroom. When she came back, her hands were full of her own artwork, little drawings and sketches she used to pin around her desk. She ripped them down one by one, tore some of them to shreds, and then marched to her manager's desk to demand a private meeting. They left together. 10 minutes later, only the manager returned. We didn't know it then, but we were nearing the end. After Emily's meltdown and her storming out with torn-up drawings in hand, it felt like something in the air had shifted. There was this thick tension in the office, like the entire building was holding its breath. People kept glancing around like they expected her to come back in and explode again. But she didn't return that day. When she finally came back to work, things seemed off. Not that they hadn't already been off, but now there was this forced calm to her, a quiet intensity that made people uneasy. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't ranting. But she was watching everyone. Closely. Observing. Then, out of nowhere, something strange happened. There was a quiet guy in our department, I'll call him David, who mostly kept to himself. He did his job, didn't engage in drama, and minded his own business. He'd had a few minor run-ins with management in the past over misplaced materials, nothing major, just a few errors here and there that got chalked up to oversight. But then someone noticed something that made all of our stomachs turn. Apparently, during one of Emily's private meltdowns, she had been caught, on security footage, going into David's workstation and subtly moving things around. It wasn't aggressive or chaotic. It was calculated. She rearranged folders, moved documents into the wrong bins, and even swapped labels on files related to clinical trials. Let me say that again, clinical trials. Our company is in the medical field, and the files she tampered with were related to ongoing cancer studies. These weren't just office notes or routine paperwork. These were data and protocols tied to real patients and real research. The idea that she had been messing with them, to hurt someone or to cover her own tracks, was horrifying. No one could say for sure why she did it. Maybe she felt rejected by David, who she once seemed to flirt with early on, before realizing he wasn't interested. Or maybe he just happened to be an easy target, someone she could frame to deflect attention from herself. I don't know. But I do know that David had been under scrutiny for months, blamed for errors that were now clearly not his fault. When the truth surfaced, leadership stopped dancing around the issue. From that moment on, I could tell they were working behind the scenes to end this, quietly but permanently. Meanwhile, Emily kept spiraling in her own way. She would shuffle through the office with that same haunted expression, occasionally pulling coworkers aside to share stories about how misunderstood she was. But the stories kept changing. One day it was about a toxic home life. The next, it was how jealous everyone was of her. Then it would loop back around to Sarah again, blaming her for everything from gossip to sabotage. I started noticing fewer and fewer people engaging with her. Conversations would go silent the moment she entered a room. People literally rearranged their break schedules to avoid being near her. Still, HR said nothing publicly. No statements. No timelines. Just vague reassurances to those of us who kept raising concerns. Then one morning she just didn't come in. No warning. No email. No message. Her desk was left untouched, papers scattered, doodles half-taped to the walls. For a while, no one knew if she'd been terminated, quit, or something else entirely. But when our manager returned from a leadership meeting later that day, we could tell by the look on his face, it was over. Word finally came down. Emily was no longer employed with the company. No fanfare, no confrontation. Just a quiet ending to months of chaos. You'd think there would have been cheers or relief, but it wasn't like that. We were too exhausted. Too numb. We'd lived under that storm cloud for so long that her departure felt surreal. Almost like we had to relearn how to breathe without her hovering nearby. But there was one more thing. One of the women who had been physically touched by Emily, the one with the identical tattoo incident, finally came to me in tears, saying she regretted not speaking up sooner. She feared retaliation. She feared no one would believe her. But most of all, she feared what Emily might do next. And I couldn't blame her. I felt the same way for a long time. Even after Emily was gone, people were still scared. HR assured us that she had no grounds for legal retaliation, and that if she or her relative tried to stir up trouble from a distance, they'd be met with firm legal resistance. But some scars don't fade overnight. After Emily's departure, the office didn't immediately return to normal. You don't spend months walking on eggshells, second-guessing every word, every movement, and then suddenly exhale the moment the storm passes. There was a kind of quiet grief that settled over our team. Not grief for her, grief for the damage she left behind. For me, the fallout hit hardest at home. There were days during the worst of it when I would come home and pour myself a drink before even taking off my shoes. Nights when I drank far more than I cared to admit, just trying to blunt the spinning in my head. Some evenings I didn't even go to bed. I'd pass out on the couch, too embarrassed to sleep beside my wife. I felt like I didn't deserve to. Like I had failed her somehow by letting this woman tear into my life like a wildfire and undo years of healing I thought I had under control. When I finally opened up to my wife, truly opened up, she didn't scold me. She didn't cry. She didn't walk away. She listened. She held me. She said she'd known I was falling apart but didn't know how to reach me through it. That broke me in a way Emily never could. I apologized. For the drinking. For the distance. For becoming someone I swore I wouldn't be again. She forgave me immediately. Told me she'd been scared but proud that I could finally name what I was going through. She said she knew it wasn't really about Emily, but about everything Emily had triggered, those old wounds that had never fully closed. I promised her, and myself, that I'd start doing better. For her. For us. We talked more after that. Sat on the couch late into the night sometimes, just unraveling all the knots I'd kept hidden. She encouraged me to stay in therapy. To go deeper this time. Not just process what happened, but understand what it unearthed. I've been trying. As for Emily and her relative, I heard they packed up and moved to another state. It's possible they're starting fresh somewhere else. That they'll blend into a new company, with new people who haven't seen behind the curtain. I can't say I wish them well. But I do hope they get the help they clearly need, if only so they don't destroy more lives the way they did ours. There was talk for a while that they might try to retaliate, maybe legally or through some online smear campaign, but nothing ever came of it. And frankly, they have no legal legs to stand on. HR documented everything. Witnesses were plenty. If anything, they were lucky to leave without a lawsuit trailing behind them. I've told a few of the women, Sarah, Rachel, others, that if they ever choose to pursue action, I'll support them 100%. I'll write letters. I'll testify. I'll take this post down if it helps protect them. Whatever they need. Because what happened wasn't just a workplace meltdown. It was trauma. For all of us. And to anyone reading this who has been through something similar, please don't ignore the signs. Whether it's manipulation, false accusations, invasive behavior, or emotional instability, it matters. And it's not your job to carry it alone. Get help. Speak up. You deserve to feel safe where you work, and you deserve peace when you come home. To the ones still healing, I see you. To the ones still scared, you're not alone. And to Emily, wherever you are, I hope you find help before someone else gets hurt.